I always believed love was built on kindness, on small gestures, on the quiet ways you show someone they matter. That was who I was. That was who Kelly said she loved. Soft-spoken, patient Ed from Austin, the man who held doors open, who remembered every anniversary without a single reminder. But that night, standing outside our bedroom door, the illusion shattered. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I was just passing by when I heard the laughter. Kelly's voice rang out, sharp and unkind. "He's too soft," she said, almost giggling. "Always asking what I want, always trying to make me happy. God, sometimes I wish he'd just be a man and decide something for once without checking with me first. It's exhausting." The way her friends laughed with her, the way she dismissed me so easily, like I was nothing but an annoyance, those sounds drilled into my chest deeper than any knife could. I froze, feeling my throat close up, then quietly backed away. I needed somewhere to breathe, to think. The garage was my refuge that night, among old tools and dusty memories. I sat there for what felt like hours, replaying her words over and over. 6 years married, and this is how she saw me now? The man who had cared for her through illnesses, who supported her every whim, who compromised first just to keep peace, he was now the punchline to her drunken jokes. I had thought marriage was about putting your partner first. Now I wondered, when had Kelly ever done the same for me? When had my needs ever been her priority? The more I thought about it, the more the answer became unbearable. Never. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront her immediately. No, that would be too easy for her to dismiss, to cry, to twist things around. Instead, I would change. I would become the man she thought she wanted, or at least the man who didn't ask, didn't beg, didn't break. I would test her. Test us. And if I failed her expectations, well, then she would see what true exhaustion really looked like. The next morning, the first thread of change was woven into our routine. Normally, I would have been up before Kelly, preparing her coffee just the way she liked it, laying out a simple breakfast she could grab before work. This time, I made only enough for myself. I sat at the kitchen table, savoring the silence, the smell of my own coffee, the clink of my spoon against the ceramic mug. When she finally came downstairs, still groggy, her hair in a loose bun, she blinked at the empty countertop like something was missing. "Where's mine?" she asked, half laughing, expecting me to jump up and fix it immediately. I shrugged casually. "Didn't know when you'd be down," I said. "Everything's there if you want to make your own." The confusion on her face was almost enough to make me smile. Almost. Instead, I sipped my coffee slowly, feeling a strange new strength building inside me. That evening, when dinner was done, she plopped onto the couch, flipping through TV channels like always. Normally, I would clean everything up while she relaxed. But not tonight. Tonight I stood up from the table and said, "We can both clean up tomorrow. I have work to finish." No question, no pleading for agreement. Just a statement. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, but said nothing. As I walked past her, I caught the faintest flicker of irritation in her eyes. Good. Let it fester. Let her wonder. That night, lying stiffly next to her in bed, I kept my back turned. Her hand brushed against my arm once, tentative, as if reaching for an old pattern, but I didn't move. Didn't react. My mind was elsewhere, busy building a different kind of future. I was done chasing crumbs of affection. From now on, I was done being easy. I had heard the truth with my own ears. She didn't want soft. She didn't want devotion. She wanted resistance. She wanted something to push against, to challenge her. Fine. I could be that. I could be so much more than she ever thought she needed, or deserved. The first real battle had just begun. And for once, I wasn't scared to fight it. The days that followed were a strange dance, a careful tightening of the screws. I stopped volunteering for everything. When she casually mentioned needing help setting up her friend's party decorations, I smiled politely and said, "I've got plans that day." When she hinted at me running her errands, I simply nodded without answering, letting the silence carry my refusal. Kelly grew restless quickly. Small signs at first, longer sighs, sharper tones when she spoke, more time spent scrolling through her phone instead of talking to me. I pretended not to notice. I stayed late at work a few evenings, grabbed dinner with old friends I had nearly forgotten during my years of marriage. Reclaiming my time felt like rediscovering oxygen after drowning. Kelly's frustration boiled over one evening when I told her I'd signed up for a weekend fishing trip with the guys. No apologies, no checking with her first. "You didn't even ask me," she snapped, crossing her arms. "I'm telling you," I replied evenly. "I'm not asking." She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. I could almost see the calculations flickering behind her eyes. How to guilt me? How to twist this? But nothing came out. Not yet. That night, after she went to sleep, I sat alone in the living room, staring at our wedding photo still perched above the mantel. We looked so young then, so hopeful. I wondered if that young man would recognize the man I was becoming now. Maybe not. Maybe that was a good thing. The next day, I made my first real move. I casually borrowed her phone, pretending I needed to check the weather. My hands didn't shake as I opened her message apps. They should have. Because what I found confirmed a fear I hadn't dared to fully admit yet. There were dozens of texts, some from numbers I didn't recognize. Flirty, intimate messages. Secret meetings disguised as gym sessions or girls' nights. But one name stood out: Brian. Our neighbor. Our friend. The man who had once toasted at our anniversary dinner, praising our perfect love. The rage that flooded me wasn't hot and reckless. It was cold and pure. I didn't smash her phone. I didn't storm into the bedroom. I simply put the device back where I found it, my mind already racing ahead. If she thought I was soft before, she had no idea what kind of storm was coming for her now. The plan began to form in icy, meticulous pieces. No shouting matches, no desperate pleading. That would give her power, make me look pathetic. No, I would dismantle everything silently, methodically, the way a surgeon carves away a tumor. First, I met with my lawyer. Not just any lawyer. This was someone who specialized in protecting assets during high-conflict divorces. I had spent years building my construction business, carefully growing it from a two-man crew into a thriving company. I wasn't about to let her take half because she got bored. "Move your assets quietly," my lawyer advised. "Liquidate some, transfer others. Start now. She can't take what she can't see." So I did. I sold off equipment I no longer needed. I transferred ownership of certain properties to a newly formed LLC under a different name. Bit by bit, the empire I had built was being shielded. Kelly didn't notice. She was too busy posting gym selfies and brunch photos with her giggling pack of enablers. Too busy sneaking around with Brian, thinking she was clever. The second step was more personal. I stopped being available. Emotionally, physically, mentally. When she texted me during the day, usually some petty complaint about the house or a demand for attention, I responded with polite, distant one-liners. When she tried to engage me at home, I gave her cool civility. I wasn't cruel. I was indifferent. And indifference, I discovered, was far more terrifying than anger. The first real crack appeared one Saturday night. She came home late, clearly expecting me to be asleep. I wasn't. I sat in the kitchen, quietly reading. "Hey," she said, awkwardly setting down her purse. "Out late," I commented without looking up. "Yeah, just with the girls," she said too quickly. I nodded once, then turned a page. No accusations? No interrogation. Just silence. And in that silence, I saw something flicker across her face: fear. For the first time in a long time, Kelly wasn't sure if she was winning. And she had no idea that this was just the beginning. The ground under her feet was shifting, and soon it would crumble entirely. But not with explosions. No, that was too easy. I was going to let her bury herself with her own hands, one careless decision at a time. 2 weeks later, the perfect opportunity fell right into my lap. Brian's wife, Lydia, showed up at my office unannounced. She looked wrecked, red-rimmed eyes, trembling hands. Without a word, she placed a small manila envelope on my desk. Photos. Screenshots. Printouts of text messages. Evidence of everything. Brian and Kelly together. Dates, hotel bookings, even candid shots of them caught mid-embrace, too wrapped up in each other to notice anyone else. "I thought you should know," Lydia said, voice flat, like all her anger had already burned itself out. I nodded, throat tight with rage and gratitude. "Thank you," I said simply. She left without another word. I sat there for a long time, staring at the pile of betrayal in front of me. It was one thing to suspect. Another to know beyond all doubt. Strangely, I didn't feel the urge to confront Kelly yet. No shouting, no slammed doors. That would let her frame herself as the victim. Instead, I smiled grimly and slipped the evidence into my briefcase. It was time to accelerate my plan. That night, when Kelly pranced in late smelling like perfume and cheap wine, I greeted her at the door with an easy smile. "Big night?" I asked. She blinked, thrown off by my tone. "Yeah, just dinner with Ashley and the girls." "Sounds fun," I said. "I'm glad you're making time for yourself." I kissed her lightly on the forehead, just enough to make her skin crawl with guilt. I could feel it, the way her body stiffened, the way her eyes darted away. Perfect. Over the next few days, I quietly gathered what I needed: bank statements, phone logs, receipts. Building a meticulous case. At the same time, I filed the paperwork to sell the last pieces of my business that weren't already protected. By the time she realized what was happening, it would be too late. I booked a private investigator, just to cover all the angles. Not that I really needed more proof, but the more documentation I had, the more leverage I'd hold. I wasn't just ending a marriage. I was ensuring she wouldn't walk away with a dime more than she deserved. And best of all, she still thought she had me wrapped around her finger. Still thought she was winning. Poor Kelly. She had no idea she was dining on the last scraps of her illusion. The day I served her the papers was almost boring in its execution. I had planned every detail to precision. It happened on a Sunday morning, while she was lounging on the couch in her favorite silk robe, scrolling through Instagram, pretending to be busy while completely ignoring me. The doorbell rang. She barely looked up. "Can you get that, babe?" she called lazily. "It's for you," I said without emotion. She sighed and padded to the door barefoot, swinging it open. The process server smiled politely and handed her the envelope. "You've been served," he said before walking away. I watched from the kitchen as she blinked down at the papers in confusion, as her eyes widened, as her hand clutched the envelope like it might bite her. "Ed?" she called, her voice high and shaky. I wiped my hands on a towel and strolled over. "Divorce papers," I said calmly. "Read them carefully." She started flipping through the packet, her breathing quickening with each page. "Wait, what? Why?" she stammered. "I thought we were fine. I mean, we had a rough patch, but—" She trailed off, the lies dying in her throat. I tilted my head slightly. "You were never really good at hiding your secrets, Kelly. You just thought I was too soft to notice." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "But can't we talk about this?" she whispered. "I love you, Ed." I was just confused. I shook my head, the pity I might have once felt long gone. Love isn't treating someone like a backup plan. Love isn't sneaking around with the neighbor while your husband's busting his back for you. She burst into tears then, real sobs that echoed off the kitchen walls. I stood there, feeling strangely detached, like I was watching someone else's tragedy unfold. I had rehearsed this moment so many times in my head, and now that it was happening, there was no triumph, no gloating. Only a deep, quiet finality. "You wanted excitement," I said softly. "Congratulations. You're about to have all the freedom you can handle." I turned away before she could see the last flicker of sadness in my eyes. There was nothing left to salvage. The war was over before she even knew it had begun. In the weeks that followed, Kelly tried everything. Late-night texts filled with memories of better days. Tearful voicemails pleading for a second chance. Carefully curated social media posts showing her at brunches, yoga classes, smiling like nothing had changed. All a show. All desperate, transparent attempts to regain control of a narrative that had already slipped through her fingers. I ignored them all. I had moved out of the house 2 days after serving the papers, leaving her with the empty shell she helped create. I stayed at a furnished condo downtown, overlooking the river. The space was small, clean, and most importantly, mine. No shared memories hanging on the walls, no invisible chains weighing me down. For the first time in years, I could breathe. My business sale had finalized with flawless timing. My accounts were safe. My investments hidden. Legally, financially, emotionally, I was free. Kelly's lawyer tried to challenge the divorce settlement, of course. She demanded more money, citing emotional distress and sacrifices made during our marriage. My lawyer simply slid across the table a thick folder of evidence: her affair with Brian, her social media posts flaunting her new life, the money she had secretly funneled into private accounts. Kelly's face when she saw the evidence, pure horror. The settlement offer on the table was generous compared to what she would have gotten if we dragged this to court. She knew it. She took it. She had no choice. After she signed the papers, she lingered outside the courthouse, looking small, fragile, and utterly lost. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered standing outside that bedroom door months ago, listening to her laugh at my expense. I remembered the man she had mocked, the man she had thought too weak to ever stand up for himself. That man was gone. And the one standing there now owed her nothing. As I walked past her without a word, she reached out, a small, trembling hand brushing my sleeve. I didn't flinch. I didn't even slow down. Some things, once broken, can never be rebuilt. Some goodbyes don't need to be spoken aloud to be final. After the dust settled, I found myself facing a life I had barely dared to imagine. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't filled with wild adventures or new romances. It was something far rarer, peaceful. I started spending more time at the gym, rebuilding not just my strength but the confidence I had lost piece by piece over the years. I reconnected with old friends, people who remembered me as more than just Kelly's husband, people who laughed with me instead of at me. Saturday nights were no longer reserved for arguments, or forced movie nights where Kelly stared at her phone half the time. Now they were mine. Sometimes I went out for a drink with the guys. Sometimes I stayed home, grilled a steak, and watched the game with nobody telling me to turn it down. I even picked up an old hobby I had abandoned years ago, woodworking. There was something deeply satisfying about creating something tangible, solid, from raw, stubborn material. Kind of like rebuilding my own life. Kelly, meanwhile, didn't fare so well. The Instagram photos changed first. The endless party shots dried up. The fake smiles turned brittle, desperate. Brian never divorced Lydia. Instead, he quietly moved away with his family, leaving Kelly standing alone. No new boyfriend came rushing in to save her. No parade of admirers fighting to take my place. Just silence. Just the long, slow realization that maybe, just maybe, she had overestimated her worth in a world that was far less forgiving than she had dreamed. Word got back to me through mutual acquaintances. Kelly had downsized to a cramped apartment across town. She had picked up extra hours at her retail job, struggling to keep up with the rent. The friends who once cheered her on during girls' nights began fading away, one by one. Freedom, it turned out, wasn't as glamorous when you had to carry it alone. I didn't gloat. I didn't send her a message or post cryptic quotes online. I simply lived. I built. I thrived. She had gambled everything we had on a fantasy. And now she was learning the brutal truth about real life: you don't always get to start over without paying the price. It was a crisp fall evening when I finally realized I had crossed some invisible threshold. I was standing on the balcony of my condo, a glass of bourbon in hand, watching the sunset burn orange over the river. The city buzzed below me, alive and restless, but I felt utterly still. I wasn't thinking about Kelly. I wasn't even thinking about what had happened. I was thinking about the future. For the first time in years, it felt wide open, untethered to anyone else's expectations. A friend had invited me to a small gathering that night, something casual, just good food and good people. Months ago, I would have made an excuse. Stayed home, buried myself in old memories, nursing invisible wounds. But tonight I got dressed, shrugged on a jacket, and went. The party was at a rooftop lounge overlooking downtown Austin, a soft breeze carrying the scent of barbecue and jasmine through the air. People laughed, talked, clinked glasses. It was easy, natural. No hidden agendas, no tightrope walks trying to avoid landmines. I ended up talking to a woman named Claire. She was smart, funny, with a wry sense of humor and a glint in her eye that told me she had seen some things too. We talked for hours, about books, travel, business, everything and nothing. There was no flirting, no forced chemistry. Just two people existing in the same space, genuinely enjoying each other's company. And for the first time, I didn't feel like half of a broken hole desperately searching for validation. I felt complete, standing right there, bourbon in hand, laughter in my ears. At the end of the night, as we said goodbye, Claire smiled and said, "You're not like most guys I meet." I smiled back, a real smile this time, not the brittle mask I used to wear. "I guess I'm not." Walking back to my car, I realized something important. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore, not to Kelly, not to Claire, not even to myself. I had survived the storm. And better yet, I had rebuilt. Not as a softer version of who I once was. Not as someone harder and bitter. But as someone whole. Someone real. Someone finally free. As winter crept into Austin, life settled into a new rhythm that felt natural in a way it hadn't for years. Mornings were quiet, unhurried. I would wake before sunrise, brew my own coffee exactly how I liked it, and sit by the window watching the world slowly wake up. No demands, no passive-aggressive sighs from across the breakfast table. Just peace. On weekends, I took long drives into the hill country, letting the endless roads unwind the last tight knots inside me. Sometimes I stayed overnight in little roadside inns, places Kelly would have turned her nose up at, but which suited me perfectly now. Simple, honest places. In one dusty town off Highway 290, I stumbled into a vintage bookstore run by an old couple who reminded me of how love should look, quiet, steadfast, and woven into the bones of their life together. They asked about my story, and for once, I didn't flinch. I told them I had been married. That it ended. That I was better for it. They smiled knowingly and said, "Some endings are just beginnings in disguise." I bought a few books, not really needing them, but wanting to carry that feeling home with me. Back in Austin, I started volunteering at a local shelter on weekends, something I had always wanted to do but never made time for. It grounded me, reminded me that pain wasn't unique, and that healing could be found in helping others. Claire and I kept crossing paths too, naturally, without forcing it. Coffee here, a shared dinner there. It was easy, unpressured. We were two people simply living our lives, and if those lives occasionally overlapped, it felt right. There were no promises, no expectations. Just moments. And sometimes, moments were enough. Every so often, I would hear about Kelly. Usually from a friend of a friend. She was dating again, young, reckless types who burned hot and fast, leaving ashes behind. She had lost her apartment and moved in with a friend. Her social media posts were less frequent now, a little more hollow, a little more desperate. I didn't take pleasure in it. Pity, maybe. Sadness for the woman who once could have had the world if she had only valued it. But her story was no longer mine. She was a chapter one had finished, the kind you don't reread. Life had turned its page. And so had I. Spring brought a new kind of warmth, one that felt different from the heavy summers and mild winters I was used to. It was the kind of warmth that seeped in slow, steady, without drama. I spent my days working on projects that excited me, taking consulting gigs when I wanted to, refusing them when I didn't. Money was no longer a tether, it was a tool, and I finally knew how to use it wisely. On a Saturday morning, as I was sanding down a cedar bench in my garage, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. It was Lydia, Brian's wife. Or ex-wife now. Her voice was cautious but kind. She thanked me again for how I had handled things back then. How I hadn't lashed out or dragged everything into the mud. She mentioned that she was moving out of state soon, starting fresh. Just wanted to say goodbye, she said. You deserve better, Ed. We both did. I thanked her sincerely and wished her luck, feeling a strange sense of closure I hadn't even realized I needed. It wasn't just Kelly's chapter that had ended. It was everything tied to that old life, the people, the places, the expectations. All of it was fading into the past where it belonged. That evening, Claire invited me to a small backyard gathering. Nothing fancy. Just a few friends, a fire pit, cheap beer, and stories traded under the stars. We ended up sitting next to each other, knees brushing lightly, not by design but by comfort. She handed me a beer and smiled. You know, she said, for a guy who's been through hell, you don't seem bitter. I chuckled, taking a sip. That's because I made it out the other side. She tilted her head, studying me. A lot of people don't. I looked into the fire, the flames cracking and snapping, alive and wild but somehow contained. They don't, I agreed. But sometimes, losing everything you thought mattered is exactly how you find what really does. Claire clinked her bottle against mine, a soft, understanding smile on her lips. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future again, not built on someone else's dreams, but my own. A future shaped not by betrayal or bitterness, but by quiet strength. And maybe, just maybe, something even better. Freedom hadn't come from revenge. It hadn't even come from justice. It had come from remembering who I was before I let love turn into surrender. Some scars you carry forever, but some you wear like armor. And tonight, for the first time, I was glad for every single one of them. When life shatters, you have two choices: cling to the ruins or build something stronger from the pieces. I chose to rebuild. If you felt every step of this journey, hit that like button, leave a comment about the story that struck you the most, and subscribe. The next one will leave an even deeper mark.